Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
Looking back now, I realize I'd been living with a stranger for months without even knowing it. The woman I'd married 15 years earlier had somehow slipped away, replaced by someone who smiled at me over morning coffee while planning her escape. It was a Tuesday night in March when everything came crashing down. I remember because I'd just gotten home from a particularly rough day at the office, my shoulders aching from hunching over spreadsheets for 10 hours straight. The house felt different when I walked in. Too quiet, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Usually Rebecca would call out a greeting from whatever room she was in, but that night there was nothing but silence. I found myself checking my watch, wondering where she could be. She always texted when her plans changed, a habit we'd developed over years of marriage. But my phone showed no messages, no missed calls, just an empty screen that somehow felt ominous. For weeks, I'd been pushing down this gnawing feeling in my chest. Little things that didn't quite add up. A new cologne I'd never smelled before lingering on her clothes. Evening meetings that seemed to stretch later and later. The way she guarded her phone now, keeping it face down during dinner and taking it with her even to the bathroom. I told myself I was being paranoid. Work stress was eating at me, making me suspicious of shadows. But that night, something in me finally snapped. Instead of turning on the television and drowning my doubts in mindless shows, I decided to look for answers. Rebecca had always been particular about organization, everything in its proper place. But lately, she'd been spending considerable time in what we called the spare room. She claimed the cell reception was better there for her work calls, though we'd never had connection problems anywhere else in the house. Walking into that room felt like trespassing in my own home. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Desk tidy, books arranged neatly on the shelf, trash can empty. But as I examined things more closely, something caught my eye. Behind a row of paperbacks, there was a small velvet box I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Rebecca wasn't one for collecting jewelry she didn't wear, and this box looked expensive. Inside were diamond earrings that took my breath away. Not because they were beautiful, but because I'd never bought them for her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat there holding those earrings, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. The simplest explanation was also the most devastating one. Someone else was buying my wife jewelry. About an hour later, I heard the front door open. Rebecca's voice floated through the house, brighter than it had been in months. "Honey, I picked up some flowers," she called out. Flowers. In all our years together, I'd been the one to bring home flowers. It was my gesture, my way of showing I cared. I stayed in the living room, listening to her heels click across the kitchen floor. When she appeared in the doorway carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, I felt my stomach turn. She looked guilty, though she was trying hard to hide it. "Long day?" she asked, setting the flowers on the side table. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they're testing the waters. "Fine," I managed to say, though my throat felt dry. She moved around the room, fussing with the flowers, adjusting cushions, anything to avoid looking directly at me. "I thought we could use some color in here," she said. "How was your evening?" I didn't respond immediately. I was watching her face, searching for tells. She seemed nervous, though she was working hard to appear casual. Then, as she turned to head upstairs, she stopped dead in her tracks. The wedding photo that had hung on that wall for over a decade was gone. I'd taken it down earlier, curious to see if she'd notice. The shock on her face told me everything I needed to know. "Where's our picture?" The question came out as barely a whisper. I stood slowly, letting the moment stretch between us. "Put it away," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Thought it was time for something different. She clutched the flower stems tighter, her knuckles going white. "Different? That's been there since we moved in." I shrugged. Sometimes change is good. For the first time in months, she looked truly rattled. Her eyes kept darting between me and the empty wall, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite grasp. "I'm going to bed," I announced, brushing past her. "Tomorrow's another long day." I left her standing there with those damn flowers, her face pale as paper. As I climbed the stairs, I knew I'd planted a seed of worry that would keep her awake. Whatever secret she was hiding, it wouldn't stay buried much longer. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the look of terror on Rebecca's face when she noticed the missing photograph. That picture had been a cornerstone of our home, a symbol of our commitment. Her reaction told me it meant something to her beyond sentiment. It represented the life she was betraying. She came to bed much later than usual, moving carefully in the dark, so she wouldn't wake me. But I felt her restlessness, the way she tossed and turned, her breathing irregular. For once, I wasn't the only one losing sleep over our marriage. The next morning, I decided to play it safe. Acting suspicious or confrontational would only put her on guard. So I followed my usual routine: coffee, quick scan of the news, toast with jam. Rebecca, however, was different. She chattered more than she had in weeks, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "Well enough," I lied, not looking up from the sports section. "Good." She sat across from me, cradling her mug like it was an anchor. "About that photograph. Why did you really take it down? It's not like you to rearrange things without mentioning it." I met her eyes over the newspaper. "Told you. Felt like a change." She forced a laugh that sounded hollow. "A change? That was our wedding day. Those memories matter, don't they?" "Do they?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Her smile faltered, and for a moment I thought she might confess everything. Instead, she shook her head and mumbled something about me being in a mood. She grabbed her phone and disappeared toward the spare room, the same room where I'd found those earrings. I waited a few minutes before following, moving quietly down the hallway. Through the closed door, I could hear her voice, low and urgent. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. There was a pause, then a strained laugh. "Yes, I'm certain. It's just a picture. You're worrying over nothing." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. She wasn't just cheating. She was discussing me with whoever was on the other end of that call, reassuring them that I was too blind to see what was happening under my own roof. I backed away before she could catch me listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed proof, real evidence that would leave no room for doubt or manipulation. And I knew exactly where to find it. That night, when Rebecca was in the shower, I slipped into the spare room. Her phone sat on the nightstand, plugged into its charger. My hands shook as I picked it up, hoping she hadn't changed her passcode. She hadn't. I opened her messages, scrolling past conversations with friends and coworkers until I found what I was looking for. The contact was saved simply as J, just a letter, nothing more. But the messages told a story that made my blood run cold. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Read one message from 2 weeks ago. You were stunning in that green dress," came the reply. "I wish I could have stayed longer. Next time, wear the earrings I gave you." I dropped the phone like it was on fire. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing the air from my lungs. The shower was still running, buying me time, but I could barely think straight. Those earrings. The ones I'd found hidden away. They were his gift to her. His mark on my wife. I managed to put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and stumbled to the living room, trying to steady my breathing. When Rebecca emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, wrapped in her terry cloth robe, she barely glanced at me before heading upstairs. I spent the rest of the night staring at those text messages in my mind, each word burning itself deeper into my memory. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers. But I knew Rebecca well enough to realize she'd find a way to explain it all away, to make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes. If I was going to end this marriage, I needed to do it right. No room for excuses or manipulation. The next day was torture. Sitting across from Rebecca at breakfast, watching her butter her toast and sip her coffee like nothing had changed, felt surreal. She even wore those diamond earrings, catching the morning light as she moved her head. "Those are pretty," I said, nodding toward the earrings. She touched one unconsciously. "These? I've had them forever." Another lie, delivered so smoothly it might have been the truth. I wondered how many others there had been, how long she'd been practicing deception. When she left for work, kissing my cheek like a dutiful wife, I got to work. Rebecca might have been careful with her phone, but she was careless with her laptop. She used the same password for everything, our anniversary date, which now felt like a cruel joke. Her email revealed even more than her text messages. There was an entire folder labeled personal that made my stomach churn. Photos of her at restaurants I'd never been to, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. Videos of her in hotel rooms, holding up champagne glasses and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. "Miss you already," she whispered to the camera in one video, blowing a kiss before it ended. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to watch anymore. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming, though I hadn't made a sound. I called my buddy Eric, who worked in telecommunications and owed me more than one favor. Without going into details, I asked him to run a reverse lookup on the phone number from Rebecca's messages. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. When he called back, his voice was serious. "Name's Jonathan Pierce. Works as a district manager for some consulting firm. Lives about 40 minutes from you. You want me to dig deeper?" "No," I said quickly. "That's enough." Jonathan Pierce. No longer just a letter in Rebecca's phone, but a real person with a real name. The man who was destroying my marriage now had an identity. That evening, I decided to test Rebecca's commitment to her lies. When she came home, I greeted her with a smile and a glass of wine, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. "Rough day?" I asked, handing her the glass. "Exhausting," she sighed, settling into her favorite chair. "Work's been absolutely crazy lately. Anything interesting happening?" She hesitated for just a moment, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. "No, just the usual headaches." I nodded sympathetically. "I was thinking we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us. It's been too long since we had time together." Her eyes widened slightly. "That sounds wonderful, but I can't get away right now. Too much on my plate at the office." There it was again. Another smooth lie, delivered with what looked like genuine regret. "That's too bad," I said, taking a sip of my wine. "We used to be better at making time for each other." She shifted uncomfortably. "We'll figure something out soon." But I knew she was lying. Just like I knew she'd been lying about working late, about yoga classes, about everything that mattered. The following days passed in a strange sort of limbo. On the surface, we maintained the routines of married life, but underneath, I was gathering evidence and planning my next move. Rebecca seemed to sense something was different, but she couldn't put her finger on what. I started tracking her movements, something I'd never imagined doing in 15 years of marriage. She claimed to have yoga every Thursday evening, but when I drove by the studio one week, her car wasn't there. Instead, I followed the route to Jonathan Pierce's address, a luxury apartment complex on the expensive side of town. Sure enough, there was her car in the parking lot. I sat across the street for nearly 2 hours, watching the building entrance. When she finally emerged, she looked like she was glowing. Her hair was slightly messed, her lipstick gone, and she was checking her reflection in her phone screen as she walked to her car. The drive home was the longest of my life. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was well past midnight. Rebecca was already in bed, feigning sleep when I slipped under the covers. The next morning, I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "How was yoga?" I asked over breakfast. "Good," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We worked on some challenging poses. I'm still sore." I almost laughed at the irony. "Challenging poses, huh?" "Yeah, the instructor really pushed us last night." "Funny thing," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "I drove by the studio yesterday evening. Place was dark. Didn't look like any classes were going on." The color drained from her face. What were you doing there?" "Thought I'd surprise you. Maybe take you out for a late dinner." I kept my voice conversational, but inside I was seething. "But since there was no class, I'm wondering where you actually were." She opened her mouth, then closed it, like a fish gasping for air. "The class was canceled. I went to dinner with a coworker instead." "Which coworker?" "You don't know her. Try me. Jennifer from accounting." The lie came out too quickly, too rehearsed. I nodded slowly. "Jennifer, right." She grabbed her purse and phone, suddenly in a hurry to leave. "I'm late for work. We can talk about this later." But I knew we wouldn't, at least not the way she was hoping. After she left, I called a divorce attorney. The consultation was brief but informative. With the evidence I'd gathered, the text messages, the photos, the lies, I was in a strong position. But the lawyer advised me to be thorough. "Document everything," she said. "The more proof you have, the better your case will be." That weekend, Rebecca told me she had a company retreat to attend. "It's mandatory," she said, avoiding eye contact. "One of those team-building things. I won't be back until Sunday night." I nodded like I believed her. "Sounds important. Don't worry about me." She packed a small overnight bag, kissed my cheek, and left. I waited exactly 10 minutes before following her. She drove straight to the Marriott downtown. I watched from my car as she walked into the lobby, looking nervous and excited at the same time. She approached the front desk, spoke with the clerk, and received a key card. I waited another 10 minutes before going inside. The lobby was busy enough that I could blend in while keeping an eye on things. I approached the same desk clerk Rebecca had spoken with. "Excuse me," I said. "I think my wife forgot to mention our room number." "Rebecca Pierce. She just checked in a few minutes ago." The clerk checked his computer. "Room 814, sir. Shall I call up and let her know you're here?" "No, that's okay. I want to surprise her." "Room 814. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding so hard I thought other people must be able to hear it. When I reached the 8th floor, I could hear voices coming from the room. Rebecca's laugh mixed with a deeper male voice. I pressed my ear to the door, pulling out my phone to record whatever I could hear. "We can't keep doing this," Rebecca was saying, her voice strained. "Why not?" came the male voice. "Jonathan," I assumed. "You could leave him. We both know you want to. It's not that simple. He's starting to ask questions." "So what?" "He's not going to do anything about it. Too passive. He'll cry, maybe beg, but that's it." The words cut through me like a blade. Was that really how they saw me? Weak? Pathetic? "I don't know," Rebecca said. "He's been acting strange lately, different." Jonathan laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "Let him act strange. By the time he figures anything out, we'll be long gone." I'd heard enough. I backed away from the door and headed for the elevator, my hands shaking as I stopped the recording. In the lobby, I approached the front desk again. "Actually, there's been a misunderstanding with room 814, I told the clerk. "Could you call security? I think there might be an issue." The clerk looked confused but picked up the phone. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived. I explained that I was concerned about my wife's safety, vague enough to get their attention without revealing the whole truth. When we reached the 8th floor, I stepped back and let the guards handle it. They knocked on the door of 814. "Hotel security," one of them called out. "We need to speak with you." There was scrambling inside, hurried whispers, furniture moving. Finally the door opened, and there stood Rebecca, her hair disheveled, her face flushed. Behind her I could see Jonathan pulling on his shirt. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" the guard asked. Rebecca nodded quickly. "Everything's fine. There must be some mistake." That's when I stepped forward. "Hello, Rebecca." Her face went completely white. For the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. Jonathan appeared behind her, trying to look casual despite the obvious situation. "Who's this?" he asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. "I'm her husband," I said calmly, "and I think we need to talk." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, while Jonathan seemed to be calculating his next move. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing they'd walked into a domestic situation. "Look," Jonathan said finally, his voice smooth but his eyes wary. "Maybe you folks should work this out privately." "Don't," I said, cutting him off. "Don't pretend like you're not part of this." Rebecca finally found her voice. "Nick, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked. "Because I'm really curious to hear how you're going to explain this." She looked between me and Jonathan, panic clear in her eyes. "It's not. I mean, we were just what? Having a business meeting in a hotel room?" I pulled out my phone and played back part of the recording I'd made. Their voices filled the hallway, talking about leaving me, about how I was too weak to do anything about it. Rebecca's face crumpled. "Nick, please." "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer, just stood there crying. Jonathan, to his credit, at least had the decency to look ashamed. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of coming home to a woman who was planning her escape while I made dinner and asked about her day. "Sir," one of the security guards said, "we understand this is a personal matter, but we can't have this kind of confrontation in the hotel. If there's no immediate danger, we're going to have to ask everyone to leave." I nodded. I was just leaving anyway. I turned and walked toward the elevator, not looking back at Rebecca or Jonathan. I heard her calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stayed another minute, I might have done something I'd regret. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my driveway for a long time, staring at the house Rebecca and I had bought together, had planned to grow old in. Now it just felt like a monument to my own stupidity. When Rebecca came home hours later, I was sitting in the living room waiting. She walked in cautiously like she was approaching a dangerous animal. "Nick," she began, her voice soft and pleading, "please let me explain." "Go ahead," I said. "I'm listening." She sat down across from me, twisting her hands in her lap. It started as nothing. Just, Jonathan and I worked on a project together and we got to talking. I never meant for it to become anything more. But it did. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. I was confused and lonely, and he made me feel different. Different how? Excited, like I mattered, like I was more than just... She gestured around the room. More than just this routine we'd fallen into. I felt like she'd slapped me. "So this is my fault? Our marriage was too boring for you?" "No," she said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I made the choice. I'm not blaming you." "But you are," I said. "You're telling me you cheated because you were bored. Because I wasn't exciting enough." She started crying again. "I love you, Nick. I do. But I felt like we were just going through the motions, like roommates instead of husband and wife. And instead of talking to me about it, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to have an affair." She buried her face in her hands. "I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you. But we can work through this, can't we? I'll end things with Jonathan. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her for a long moment, this woman I'd shared 15 years of my life with, who I'd trusted completely. "No," I said finally. "We can't." Her head snapped up. "What?" "I'm filing for divorce, Rebecca. I've already spoken with a lawyer." "Nick, please. I want you out of the house," I continued. "You can pack your things, but I want you gone by tomorrow." She collapsed completely then, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her. Just a hollow kind of emptiness where my love for her used to be. The next morning I found a note on the kitchen counter. Rebecca had packed her things in the night and left without waking me. The note was brief. "Nick, I'm staying with my sister while I figure things out. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I'll cooperate with whatever you need for the divorce. You deserve better than what I gave you. Rebecca?" I read it twice, then threw it in the trash. The house felt different without her presence, quieter, but also cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. True to her word, Rebecca didn't fight me on anything. She took her clothes, her car, and some of the furniture. I kept the house, most of our savings, and what was left of my dignity. I heard through mutual friends that she and Jonathan didn't last long after our marriage ended. Apparently, the thrill of the affair didn't translate well to a real relationship. She moved across the country for a new job, and I haven't seen or spoken to her since. The weeks following Rebecca's departure were a mixture of relief and adjustment. I'd wake up some mornings forgetting she was gone, reaching for the coffee pot only to remember I only needed to make one cup now. The silence in the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in months. My lawyer, Patricia Hawkins, was efficient and thorough. She walked me through every step of the divorce process, explaining how the evidence I'd gathered would strengthen my case. The recordings, the text messages, the photographs, they painted a clear picture of Rebecca's betrayal that left little room for interpretation. With this kind of documentation, Patricia told me during one of our meetings, she'll have a hard time claiming this was just an emotional affair. The hotel receipts alone show this was ongoing and deliberate. I'd found those receipts while going through our joint credit card statements. 7 different hotels over the past 6 months. Each charge was during a time when Rebecca claimed to be at yoga, or working late, or attending some company function. The pattern was undeniable. What surprised me most was how calm I felt during those first weeks. I'd expected to be angrier, more devastated. Instead, I felt like I was waking up from a long, confusing dream. The pieces of my life were starting to make sense again. Eric called me regularly to check in, something I appreciated more than I could express. Having been through his own messy divorce 5 years earlier, he understood what I was going through in ways my other friends couldn't. "The hardest part isn't the divorce itself," he told me one evening over beers at our usual spot. "It's rebuilding your sense of normal. You'll find yourself doing things just because you want to, not because it's what couples do." He was right. I started eating dinner whenever I felt hungry, instead of waiting for Rebecca's schedule. I watched the shows I actually enjoyed, instead of compromising on something we both found tolerable. Small freedoms, but they felt significant. The financial aspect of the divorce was more complex than I'd anticipated. We had joint accounts, shared investments, and 15 years of intertwined financial decisions to untangle. Patricia advised me to document everything, to ensure I had a clear picture of our assets before Rebecca could move money around. I spent several evenings going through bank statements and investment portfolios, creating spreadsheets that mapped out our financial life. It was tedious work, but it revealed some interesting patterns. In the past 6 months, there had been several cash withdrawals from our joint account that I couldn't account for. Not huge amounts, but enough to fund regular hotel visits and expensive dinners. When I confronted Rebecca about these during one of our few phone conversations, she became defensive. "I needed cash for various things," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't realize I needed to clear every expense with you. For 6 months, Rebecca? What kind of things require that much cash?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "This is exactly why I couldn't talk to you about problems in our marriage. You turn everything into an interrogation." That conversation crystallized something for me. Even caught in the middle of an affair, even facing divorce because of her choices, Rebecca still couldn't take responsibility. It was my fault for being suspicious, my fault for asking questions, my fault for not being understanding enough. I realized then that I hadn't just been married to someone who cheated on me. I'd been married to someone who was fundamentally dishonest about taking accountability for her actions. The affair wasn't an aberration. It was just the most visible symptom of a deeper character issue. The divorce mediation sessions were awkward but necessary. We met in a sterile conference room with our respective lawyers, dividing up 15 years of shared life, like we were splitting up the assets of a failed business partnership. Rebecca looked different in those meetings. Smaller somehow, like the confidence she'd always carried had been deflated. She agreed to most of my requests without much argument, which Patricia said was unusual in her experience. "Most people fight harder for their assets," she told me after one particularly quick session. "Either she feels genuinely guilty, or she just wants this over with as quickly as possible." I suspected it was both. Rebecca had always hated confrontation, and now she was facing the consequences of the biggest confrontation of our marriage. She wanted out as quickly and quietly as possible. The house was the biggest point of negotiation. Rebecca had initially wanted to sell it and split the proceeds, but I fought for the right to keep it. This was my home, the place where I'd invested not just money but emotional energy. I wasn't willing to let Jonathan Pierce drive me out of my own space. In the end, I kept the house by taking on a larger share of our joint debt and giving Rebecca a portion of our savings that equaled her theoretical share of the home's equity. It wasn't the most financially efficient solution, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. During this process, I learned more about Jonathan than I'd ever wanted to know. Through mutual acquaintances in the business community, I discovered he had a reputation as something of a serial affair haver. Rebecca wasn't his first married conquest, and from what I heard, she probably wouldn't be his last. This information should have made me angry, but instead it made me sad for Rebecca. She'd thrown away our marriage for someone who saw her as just another temporary thrill. I wondered if she knew about his pattern, or if she genuinely believed she was special to him. I never told her what I'd learned. By that point, our communication had dwindled to texts about logistics. When she'd pick up more of her belongings, how to handle the final utility bills, whether she wanted any of the wedding gifts from her side of the family. The actual divorce hearing was anticlimactic. We stood before a judge who'd probably seen a dozen cases like ours that week, answered a few basic questions, and signed papers that officially ended our marriage. The whole process took less than 30 minutes. Walking out of that courthouse, I expected to feel something dramatic: closure, anger, relief. Instead, I just felt tired. 15 years of marriage ended with the stroke of a pen and a filing fee. But as the weeks passed, that tiredness gave way to something I hadn't experienced in a long time: possibility. For the first time in years, I could make decisions based purely on what I wanted, not what worked for us as a couple. I started small. I redecorated the bedroom, replacing the floral bedding Rebecca had chosen with something more masculine. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, creating a reading nook by the window where I could sit with my coffee and the morning paper. I also started cooking again. Really cooking, not just heating up dinner for two people with different tastes. I rediscovered my love for spicy food, something I'd given up because Rebecca couldn't handle heat. I bought a smoker for the back patio and spent weekends experimenting with different cuts of meat and wood combinations. These might seem like trivial changes, but they felt revolutionary. I was reclaiming parts of myself that had been compromised or suppressed during my marriage. The social aspect of divorce was more challenging than I'd anticipated. Rebecca and I had shared friends, couples we'd spent holidays and weekends with. Some of them took sides, others tried to maintain relationships with both of us, and a few just disappeared entirely, uncomfortable with the messiness of our situation. I learned to be okay with this. The friends who mattered, who reached out and included me in their plans even though I was now a single man in a world of couples, those were the relationships worth preserving. The others had probably been more Rebecca's friends than mine anyway. Eric introduced me to a group of guys who met weekly for poker. Divorced men, widowers, and a few confirmed bachelors who understood what it was like to navigate social situations as a single man over 50. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it was helpful to be around other men who'd rebuilt their lives after major changes. "The first year is about survival," said Walter, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. "The second year is about figuring out who you are now. After that, you start building the life you actually want." I was still in year 1, focused on survival and basic functioning. But I could see glimpses of what Walter meant. There were moments when I caught myself making plans that excited me, thinking about possibilities rather than just getting through each day. One of the most surprising developments was my relationship with my work. Without the emotional drain of my failing marriage, I found I had more energy and focus for my career. I started taking on projects I'd previously avoided, speaking up in meetings, positioning myself for advancement. My supervisor, Janet, noticed the change. "You seem different lately," she said during my annual review. "More engaged, more confident. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I didn't tell her about the divorce. Workplace gossip wasn't something I wanted to deal with, but I appreciated the recognition. It felt good to be seen as competent and reliable again, not just the distracted husband of a cheating wife. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Rebecca at the grocery store. It was the first time I'd seen her since our last mediation session, and the encounter was awkward for both of us. She looked good, I had to admit. Her hair was shorter, styled differently, and she'd lost some weight. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a more fashionable look than her usual conservative work attire. "Nick," she said, stopping her cart near the produce section. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, which was true. "You look good." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, I'm doing okay. Still adjusting to everything." We made small talk for a few minutes. Her new apartment, my work, the unusually warm fall weather. Neither of us mentioned Jonathan, though I noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring anymore. For that matter, neither was I. "I heard you kept the house," she said finally. "Yeah, it felt right." She nodded. "I'm glad. You always loved that place more than I did." It was an odd moment of honesty between us, an acknowledgement that maybe we'd wanted different things, even before the affair complicated everything. "Nick," she said as we prepared to go our separate ways, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just for how things ended, but for not being honest about what I was feeling before it got to that point." I looked at her for a moment, this woman who'd been such a central part of my life for so long. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You too." That conversation stayed with me for days. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was acknowledgement. We'd both failed our marriage in different ways. Her through betrayal, me through complacency. The difference was that she'd chosen to handle her unhappiness through deception, while I'd chosen to work through mine honestly. As fall turned to winter, I found myself thinking less about Rebecca and more about what came next. I started dating again, nothing serious. Just coffee dates and casual dinners with women I met through friends or online. It was strange at first, talking about myself as a single man, explaining my situation to people who'd never known me as half of a couple. Some of the women I met had their own divorce stories, their own tales of betrayal and recovery. Others were widows, or women who'd never married, each with their own perspective on relationships and trust. I wasn't looking for anything serious, and I was upfront about that. I needed time to figure out who I was as a single person before I could even think about being part of a couple again. But the conversations were good practice, reminding me how to connect with someone new, how to present myself authentically. One woman, Linda, became a good friend, even though our romantic chemistry never materialized. She was a decade younger than me, divorced with teenage kids, and had a perspective on relationships that I found refreshing. The mistake most people make, she told me over dinner one evening, is trying to find someone to complete them. But you can't build a healthy relationship from a place of need. You have to know who you are on your own first. She was right. I'd married Rebecca when I was in my 30s, still figuring out my career and my place in the world. I'd let our relationship define me in ways that probably weren't healthy. Now, at 54, I had a clearer sense of my values, my boundaries, my non-negotiables. Trust was definitely a non-negotiable. I couldn't imagine ever again being with someone who made me question my own perceptions, who turned my reasonable concerns into evidence of my own inadequacy. Communication was another one. I wanted to be with someone who could talk about problems directly instead of acting them out through betrayal or passive aggression. And honesty. I needed someone who understood that small lies and big lies were part of the same spectrum, that integrity wasn't situational. These might seem like basic requirements, but I'd learned not to take them for granted. Rebecca had been charming, intelligent, and successful, but she'd lacked the fundamental character traits that make long-term relationships possible. By the time spring arrived, almost a year after Rebecca had moved out, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not just content or getting by, but actively enjoying my life. I'd developed new routines, new interests, new friendships, I'd stopped defining myself in relation to my failed marriage and started thinking of myself as someone who'd survived a difficult experience and emerged stronger. The house felt completely mine now. I'd finished redecorating, replacing the last of the furniture Rebecca and I had chosen together with pieces that reflected my own taste. I'd started a vegetable garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was managing the complex logistics of a troubled marriage. I was still careful about trust, still cautious about letting people too close too quickly, but I wasn't bitter or closed off. I'd learned to see Rebecca's betrayal as information about her character, not evidence that all relationships were doomed to failure. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if she'd come to me a year earlier and said she was unhappy, that she felt disconnected from our marriage and wanted to work on it. Would I have been receptive? Would we have been able to rebuild what we'd lost? I thought we might have. But she'd chosen deception instead of honesty, exit instead of effort. Those were her choices, and they said more about who she was than about the irreparable nature of our problems. It's been almost 2 years now, and I'm still learning how to be single again. Some days are harder than others, but I don't regret my decision. I couldn't stay married to someone who saw me as weak, who chose deception over honesty, excitement over commitment. The house is mine now. Really mine. I've redecorated, changed things around, made it reflect who I am rather than who we were as a couple. Sometimes I miss the companionship, the shared meals and quiet evenings together. But I don't miss the lies, the constant wondering, the feeling that I was living with a stranger. I've started dating again, cautiously. It's different at this stage of life. We all come with baggage, with histories that shaped us. But I've learned to trust my instincts better, to pay attention to those little warning signs I ignored before. Rebecca taught me something valuable, though I doubt that was her intention. She showed me that I'm stronger than I thought I was, that I don't have to accept betrayal just to avoid being alone, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. The empty space on the wall where our wedding photo used to hang is filled now with a painting I bought from a local artist. It's not a masterpiece, but I chose it myself, and it makes me smile every time I see it. It represents the life I'm building now. Not perfect, maybe, but honest. And after everything I've been through, honesty feels like the most precious thing in the world.